Chloe Miller miscarried. She was crying and demanding to stay at the house for a recovery period at home. Julian Thorne never allowed his mistresses to cause a scene at the house, but this time, he compromised. She just miscarried, and she has no family here. I'm worried. Make sure to prepare her light meals, and remember to vary them, she's a picky eater. Keep her comfortable with warm drinks and soothing massages for her recovery. I said nothing, silently putting away my pregnancy test results. The next day, I packed my suitcase and left, asking Mr. Jenkins to deliver divorce papers to him. Julian Thorne, this time, I truly don't want you anymore. When the divorce papers were sent over, Julian Thorne's buddies burst out laughing. Whoa, divorce papers? Is Eleanor serious this time? Eleanor's at it again. Let's make a bet, how many days until she comes back this time? A burst of laughter filled the private room. How many times has this been? That's all she ever does, trying to scare someone? I bet 3 days, at most 3 days, and she'll come back to you, apologizing. I bet 5 days, maybe Eleanor will keep up the act a little longer this time. I give it 2 days. When has Eleanor ever thrown a tantrum and not ended up softening and coming back? Julian, isn't that right? Julian Thorne's lips curled into a slight smile as he casually flicked off some ash from his cigarette. It's just a play for attention. I stared at the screen, my phone screen paused on the call with Mr. Jenkins. I had asked him to turn on the speaker when he delivered the divorce papers. I wanted to know Julian Thorne's reaction. To remind myself never to go soft again. Eleanor, Mr. Thorne hasn't signed it. Mr. Jenkins said, trailing off after leaving the firm. As long as it's delivered, that's enough. I pulled my suitcase. He never takes me seriously anyway. Just as I pushed the suitcase in. Oh, the living room, the master bedroom door suddenly opened. Ashley Dawson rubbed her eyes and walked out. She was wearing Julian's shirt, the collar open, revealing suggestive red marks. What time is it? Why didn't anyone wake me for breakfast? Ashley Dawson frowned, her voice soft and delicate, carrying the laziness of someone just waking up. I walked toward the door with my suitcase, expressionless. She finally noticed my suitcase, paused, then scoffed, this routine again? Didn't you just throw a fit yesterday? Move. I said coldly. She blocked the doorway, arms crossed, examining me. Julian said for you not to act out and to stay here obediently and take care of me. I chuckled. Oh? Julian Thorne loves you so much, yet he won't even hire you a professional nurse after your miscarriage? Ashley Dawson's face changed, clearly not expecting me to retort like that. She bit her lip, then pulled out her phone and dialed. Julian, sis wants to leave again, and she's scolding you for not hiring me a nurse. Her voice was full of grievance, but her eyes challenged me. I stood to the side, watching her clumsy act, and felt nothing but absurdity. 20 minutes later, Julian Thorne returned. He didn't even take off his suit jacket, walking directly to me, his gaze sweeping over my suitcase before settling on my face. Have you made enough of a scene? His tone was indifferent, like he was reprimanding an unruly child. I didn't speak. Julian Thorne reached out to take my suitcase, but I moved to the side, avoiding his grasp. His brows furrowed slightly, and he said patiently, stop this. Go make some food, Ashley's hungry. I stared at him for 2 seconds, then suddenly smiled. Julian Thorne, I began slowly, do you think I can never leave you? His expression faltered slightly, his gaze deep as he looked at me, but I couldn't read his emotions. Without waiting for his answer, I pushed my suitcase around him and walked directly toward the door. Stop. His voice deepened, and he clasped my wrist, the grip painfully tight. I told you to stop acting out. His voice was low and cold, a warning. I violently shook his hand off. I'm giving you 3 days for the divorce papers. After 3 days, I'll file for divorce. The year I met Julian Thorne, he had just returned from overseas after completing his master's in finance. The Thorne family held a grand welcome banquet, and as the daughter of a partnering representative, my father insisted I attend. That day, Julian Thorne wore a well-tailored black suit, his eyes cool and distant, his demeanor refined. I stood on the periphery of the crowd, watching him surrounded by socialites from various prominent families, a polite, detached smile on his face, but his eyes remained utterly indifferent. Is that the Thorne family heir? I whispered to my best friend. My best friend looked surprised. You don't know? Julian Thorne is notoriously hard to get in our circle. So many socialites have thrown themselves at him, and they can't even get his number. I sipped my champagne, saying nothing. It started to rain as the banquet ended. I stood under the eaves, waiting for my driver, when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. Forgot your umbrella? A low voice sounded in my ear. I turned and met Julian Thorne's eyes. He opened a black umbrella, tilting his head slightly. Need a ride to the parking lot? Rain formed a fine mesh along the umbrella's edge. I caught the faint scent of cedarwood from him, and my heart skipped a beat. That was the first time I was ever so close to him. Later, I learned he hadn't just given me a ride that night. Julian Thorne had always known how to maintain appearances, how to make everyone believe he was polite and refined, and how to keep his distance without anyone noticing. I started pursuing him, in the most clumsy way possible. Knowing he liked pour-over coffee, I enrolled in a 3-month coffee course. Hearing he frequented Westwood stables, I overcame my fear of heights to learn horseback riding. Even when he casually mentioned he liked girls who played piano, I stubbornly memorized entire Chopin scores. My best friend couldn't bear it anymore. Eleanor Davies, are you crazy? Someone like Julian Thorne would never be serious. I stirred my coffee, smiling. What if? The what if appeared 3 months later. Julian's grandfather had a sudden heart attack and was hospitalized. The first thing he said upon waking was, "Julian, it's time to settle down." The Thorne family needed a dignified and proper young lady, and I happened to be the most suitable candidate in everyone's eyes. My family background was impeccable, my personality gentle, and most importantly, I loved him enough. The day he proposed, Julian Thorne knelt on one knee, the ring he offered glittering under the lights. "Eleanor Davies, will you marry me?" I looked into his deep eyes and suddenly remembered my best friend's words. Julian Thorne chose you simply because you were the easiest among all his admirers. But I still nodded. Life after marriage was ordinary and mundane, completely devoid of the usual drama and scandals of the ultra-wealthy. Yet Julian Thorne was a perfect husband. He remembered I didn't like cilantro, would prepare a comforting herbal tea during my period, and even made it a point to visit my parents with me every week. But I knew it was merely a matter of his upbringing. He never took me to private gatherings, his phone was always face down on the table, and his shirt collar occasionally bore the scent of unfamiliar perfume. I first discovered his infidelity on our first wedding anniversary. I had personally baked a cake and waited until 2 in the morning, only to scroll past a mutual friend's Instagram post. The photo showed Julian Thorne. He with his arm around a girl's waist, kissing under the neon lights of a bar. The caption read, "Julian still knows how to party." I quietly cut a slice of cake, ate it bite by bite, then deleted the screenshot of that Instagram post. The next day, when Julian Thorne returned, I was arranging flowers at the dining table. "I had a last-minute client engagement yesterday," he said, loosening his tie, his tone natural. I trimmed the rose thorns, not looking up. That sounds tough." He paused, then suddenly embraced me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Are you mad?" His warm breath brushed my ear, and my fingers trembled, a rose thorn pricking me until I bled. Julian Thorne frowned, taking my finger and putting it into his mouth. In that moment, I suddenly wanted to cry. He even faked his guilt with such tenderness. Later, I learned to feign ignorance. Julian Thorne's Chloe Millers changed one after another, from aspiring actresses to Ivy League graduates. The only constant was that they all had eyes similar to mine. How ridiculous, he even made me believe he loved me while cheating. Until last month, I ran into Ashley Dawson at the Women's Health Clinic. She was clinging to Julian Thorne's arm, sweetly saying, "Julian, the doctor says the baby is healthy." Julian Thorne looked down at her, his gaze softer than I had ever seen it. I stood around the corner, clutching my pregnancy test results. It clearly stated, 8 weeks pregnant, with the embryo developing well. An hour later, I sat on a bench outside the Women's Health Clinic, the checkup slip in my hand crumpled. The hallway was bustling with people, expectant mothers, carefully supported by their partners, young women emerging from procedure rooms, eyes red-rimmed. "Number 37, Eleanor Davies." The nurse called my name from the doorway. Inside the examination room, the doctor adjusted her glasses, looked at the report, and then at me. "Have you decided?" I clutched the hem of my clothes. "Doctor, this procedure. Is your partner not with you?" The doctor adjusted her glasses. "The recovery from the procedure is quick and largely painless, but ensure adequate rest post-procedure." I opened my mouth, wanting to say I was married. But the father of my child was currently with another woman for her prenatal checkup. So I just quietly asked, "Will it affect future pregnancies?" "Theoretically, no, but any procedure carries risks." The doctor paused. "You don't look well. Do you want to reconsider?" I hesitated. I couldn't bring myself to do it. When I left the hospital, a fine rain was falling. I stood under the eaves, watching the raindrops splash on the ground, suddenly remembering that rainy night 3 years ago, when Julian Thorne walked towards me, holding an umbrella. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from Julian Thorne. I have a last-minute client engagement tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. I stared at the screen for a long time until the rain wet the screen. I actually wanted to rush to his side immediately, to tell him I was pregnant, to tell him our little family was about to welcome a new member. But thinking of Ashley Dawson and her baby, I just replied with an okay. Back at the house, I pulled out our wedding photo album. In the photos, Julian Thorne was in a crisp suit, a perfectly poised smile on his lips. And I, in my white wedding gown, my eyes filled with undisguised joy. My fingertips gently brushed over the photos, and I suddenly realized that from beginning to end, his gaze toward me had always been so calm. The next morning, I rescheduled the procedure. Just as I was about to close the webpage, my phone suddenly rang. Julian Thorne's name flashed on the screen. This was the first time he had called me spontaneously in half a month. Eleanor, his voice came through the phone, tinged with a rare fatigue. Ashley Dawson is having some health issues, could you possibly? I listened quietly, then softly said, okay, I'll be right over. When I arrived at the hospital, the entire floor was filled with the pungent smell of disinfectant. As soon as I entered the hallway, a nurse came rushing up to me. Mr. Thorne called you, didn't he? She asked, her tone polite yet hurried. This way, please. We need you to cooperate with a blood draw. I froze, my feet still unsteady, as she half pushed, half guided me toward the phlebotomy lab. Wait. I frowned, looking at her. Why do I suddenly need a blood draw? The nurse stopped, a little awkwardly, and lowered her voice. Miss Dawson lost a lot of blood during her miscarriage. The hospital's blood bank is currently low on supply. Mr. Thorne said you have the same blood type as her. I stood still for a few seconds, as if the world had suddenly gone quiet except for my own heartbeat. She miscarried? I looked up, my voice hoarse. The nurse nodded and began to explain the situation to me. She was rushed in last night. They said she had sexual intercourse less than 3 months into her pregnancy, which caused a severe hemorrhage. Her condition is stable for now, but she's weak and needs a blood transfusion. Her tone was calm, clearly accustomed to such situations, as if she were simply stating the daily weather. But I heard every word clearly, each one like a stone, rattling and crashing into my chest, suffocating me. The words last night were like a sharp knife piercing my mind. I suddenly remembered last night, when he said he had a client engagement, his phone was unreachable, and he didn't reply to my messages. So, his so-called client engagement was having sex with Ashley Dawson. A chill rose from my feet, rushing to my head. I frowned, unsure what to say, feeling only bitterness and irony in it all. The nurse handed me a form. IST. Art at it blankly, not reaching out. Just then, Julian Thorne finally stood up from the end of the hallway. He had been sitting on the bench outside the emergency room, God knew how long. Seeing me arrive, Julian Thorne took a few steps closer, his voice hoarse. Eleanor Davies, I'm sorry. I really couldn't find anyone else. Could you please help you save your mistress? He froze, saying nothing. She's barely holding on. He sounded as if he was pleading, or perhaps explaining. I looked at him, his eyes dark with exhaustion, still smelling of alcohol, and my brows involuntarily knitted together. She needs blood, so you want me to donate blood for her? Is this the only time you remember me? My eyes welled up, but I stubbornly held back the tears. Do you remember what you told me last night? I looked at him, my voice very soft, but each word was clear like a knife. You said not to wait for you for dinner, that you were busy with work. But when you said that, weren't you with her? Julian Thorne's face stiffened, as if he'd been slapped hard. But he didn't say a word. His silence was more despairing than any argument. Standing before him, I suddenly felt like it was all pointless. It turned out that this marriage, which I had carefully maintained for so many years, meant nothing to him. When he needed me, I was a mere convenience. When he didn't, a casual word was enough to dismiss me. With trembling hands, I picked up the pen and signed my name on the form. When the door to the phlebotomy lab clicked shut, I felt as though a barrier had descended, sealing me in darkness. At that moment, I knew the line I had stubbornly held onto between us had completely snapped. After the blood draw, I felt completely drained. My arm was still bandaged, my hands cold, my steps unsteady. Julian Thorne stood at the doorway, looking at me as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. His throat moved, and finally, he only said, Eleanor Davies, thank you. I didn't respond, just glanced at him, my gaze so cold it felt foreign even to myself. He didn't stop me, as if assuming my departure was just a temporary emotional outburst. So 3 days later, he personally brought Ashley Dawson back to the house. He said, the hospital conditions aren't good, and she's still weak and emotional. Let her stay for a while. His tone was so unyielding that I left. A month later, I moved, and Julian Thorne and I had no contact whatsoever. Until his friend Mark Hayes took his girlfriend for a routine checkup at the clinic and happened to run into me downstairs at the women's health clinic. I was wearing a mask, my face pale, having just left the outpatient clinic with a medication list in my hand. Mark Hayes frowned, and when he went home, he mentioned it to Julian Thorne. She looked terrible, like she'd just had surgery. He glanced at Julian Thorne, testing the waters. Aren't you two still fighting? She didn't get some illness you don't know about, did she? Julian Thorne's heart clenched when he heard this. He instinctively reached for his phone to contact me, but his fingers froze on the screen, ultimately not pressing down. The next morning, he asked Mr. Jenkins to look into it for him. In the evening, Mr. Jenkins returned, his expression solemn. Mr. Thorne, I found out. She wasn't there for a checkup that day. It was for an abortion. Julian Thorne jolted, the coffee cup in his hand clattering to the floor, shards scattering everywhere. He couldn't believe it. What did you say? She went alone. In the registration records, it was listed as voluntary termination. The air suddenly grew quiet. Julian Thorne sat stunned on the sofa, feeling as if he'd been plunged into ice water, shivering with cold. A sudden memory flashed in his mind. The night she left, she said nothing, not even a single word of reproach. He had thought she was just leaving in a fit of pique, thinking she would eventually come back. But she hadn't even told him about the pregnancy. Julian Thorne stood by the window, clutching his phone tightly, his knuckles white. She was pregnant. And she had quietly gone to get rid of the child. His mind was a tangled mess, and he couldn't help but repeatedly retrace the day she left. He had always believed Eleanor would compromise and be the first to yield and make amends for him, a confidence ingrained deep within him. But now, something was falling apart, making him feel out of control. Ashley Dawson's recovery was faster than the doctor expected. During her stay at Julian Thorne's estate, she truly became the mistress of the house. The maids obeyed her every word, and she openly participated in household affairs. The day Julian Thorne learned Eleanor had had an abortion alone, he returned home distraught. Ashley Dawson stood by the living room balcony, and seeing Julian Thorne push the door open, she smiled and greeted him, "Honey, you're back." Julian Thorne didn't respond to her, simply stating directly, "Ashley, it's time for you to go back." Ashley Dawson froze, then her smile vanished. "I'm not fully recovered yet. The doctor said you're fine now." His voice was gentle, but there was no room for negotiation. Ashley Dawson slowly sat down, tapping her fingers on the coffee table. After a moment, she spoke. "Eleanor Davies wants a divorce, doesn't she? I might as well stay, it's a natural progression. Julian Thorne, my family isn't insignificant, we're certainly worthy of the Thornes." Julian Thorne didn't answer immediately, only stood before her, his expression calm, almost cold. "But I only have one wife, and that's Eleanor Davies." Ashley Dawson couldn't help but laugh, her eyes half sarcastic, half unwilling. "You're acting like a good husband now, but don't forget, you were the one who cheated, and you were the one who brought me back. Now that she's gone, why are you pretending to be so devoted?" Julian Thorne lowered his eyes, not refuting her. Ashley Dawson looked at his silent demeanor, and her tone suddenly sharpened. "Get real, Julian. You didn't try to stop her when she wanted to leave then, and now that she's decided to divorce, you're talking about loyalty? I'm a woman too, I know what she's thinking. You won't be able to keep her." Julian Thorne sighed softly, his voice weary and powerless. "Precisely because I made a mistake, I know even more clearly that I cannot make a second one." He turned to the maid. "Please escort Miss Dawson home." Ashley Dawson's face changed. She wanted to say something else, but the sound of the maid's footsteps interrupted her. She stood up, gave Julian Thorne a cold look, and a sarcastic smirk played on her lips. "Julian Thorne, you will eventually realize that she won't forgive you either, and you will lose me because of it." Julian Thorne didn't respond again. After the door closed, the house fell silent. He sat on the sofa, pinching the bridge of his nose, his mind in complete disarray. He knew his indiscretions after marriage had hurt Eleanor Davies. But from the beginning, he had always assumed their marriage was an arranged marriage without affection, a mutual arrangement. Eleanor Davies had indeed been a dutiful wife after they married. He had grown up overseas alone and was used to a solitary life. Yet Eleanor Davies had gradually integrated into his life, making him feel the warmth of someone waiting for him at the house. But his inherent indifference and rebellious nature couldn't be changed overnight. If his grandfather's illness hadn't prompted him to settle down, perhaps he would have spent his entire life single, a notorious playboy. But Eleanor Davies, she was truly innocent. And he was only realizing Tea now. Julian Thorne sat on the sofa, pressing his fingers to his brow, motionless for a long time. Night had deepened, and the estate lights were bright, yet they strangely made him feel desolate and lonely. This was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He suddenly stood up, turned, went upstairs, and entered the study. On the desk lay the divorce papers Eleanor Davies had left for him. He stared at the document in silence for a long time, his fingertips trembling, before finally picking it up and forcefully tearing it to shreds. The white paper slipped from his fingers, like his pride and pretense, scattering across the floor. He turned to open a drawer, intending to find a letter to put the shredded paper in, but in the very bottom, he saw a thin sheet of paper. A crumpled ultrasound report lay there quietly, like a forgotten secret. He looked down, picking it up with trembling hands, and finally saw the date and notes clearly. 6 weeks gestation, with a strong heartbeat. The name at the bottom was Eleanor Davies. Julian Thorne froze, as if struck by something, completely still. Suddenly, a dull ache rose in his heart. He suddenly remembered that night, when Eleanor Davies had suggested they have dinner together. He hadn't paid much attention then, only thinking she was fulfilling her duty as a wife. But now, looking back, perhaps she had wanted to tell him they were going to have a child. They were supposed to have a child. But he, because of a work event, got himself thoroughly drunk after a work event, and then Ashley Dawson took him away. Later, he inexplicably slept with Ashley Dawson, causing her to miscarry too. Julian Thorne looked down at the ultrasound report, his eyes slowly turning red. He had always thought he didn't care, that he wasn't interested in emotions or marriage. But now, as he truly faced the possibility of losing everything, the immense sense of loss threatened to tear him apart. He remembered the day Eleanor Davies was hospitalized. He hadn't even bothered to ask which hospital she was at. She went for the procedure alone, signed the papers alone, and lay in the hospital bed enduring everything alone. Meanwhile, he had brought another woman into the house. Julian Thorne carefully picked up the ultrasound report, his thumb gently stroking the faint dark shadow on it, his throat feeling constricted. That was his and Eleanor Davies' child. But now, there was nothing left. He slowly sat down, his knuckles white as he clutched the paper, his eyes hollow, his whole being like a lost soul. He couldn't go back. But he truly wanted to go back. The day Julian Thorne found me, the sky was heavily overcast. He stood outside the door, the tip of his black umbrella dripping water, his expression tired and silent. I didn't let him in, just watched him from the doorway. He showed no displeasure, merely lowering his eyes, looking battered and pathetic. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry." My heart trembled slightly, but I didn't answer. I should have gone to dinner with you that night. I shouldn't have gotten drunk. The child. I found out too late. He said, lowering his head, "I know saying this is useless now, but I just want to tell you how truly sorry I am. You are my wife, and I failed in my duty as a husband." I looked at him, my eyes warm with unshed tears, yet I still controlled my emotions. "Julian Thorne, all of that, it doesn't matter anymore." He froze, as if he hadn't expected me to say that. I lowered my gaze, my voice calm but firm. "If you truly want to compensate me, then let me be free. Don't continue to bind me to this marriage with your apologies and regrets. That's crueler than infidelity." Julian Thorne was silent for a long time, so long that I thought he wouldn't respond. It wasn't until the rain began to fall heavily had he finally looked up, his eyes holding a seriousness I had never seen before. "Okay," he said, "I'll set you free." He turned and left, not looking back. The rain soaked his suit, but he looked so weak, as if he could barely stand. The next morning, I received an email. It was divorce papers. The documents were complete, with no additional conditions. All I had to do was sign my name, and I would be free. And at the bottom, there was also a personal letter from Julian Thorne. "Eleanor Davies, this is the first time I've seriously written you a letter, but it's for a farewell. I'm sorry. I once thought feelings could be unbound by marriage, but only after losing you did I realize you were the only one I truly wanted to keep. You said letting you be free is the best possible outcome you can imagine. I respect you, and I agree. Thank you for your companionship all these years, and thank you for having loved me. If one day you're willing to look at me again, I'll still be here. Julian Thorne." I looked at the screen, my finger hovering over the signature line. There were no tears, but an indescribable sadness. The man I loved fell in love with me, just when I had decided not to love him anymore. Is misplaced love still love? I don't know. These minute details of love and heartbreak were too draining. I had once been deeply trapped in them. Now, I'd decided to let myself go. I took a trip to Wyndham Valley. It was a place I had once fantasized about honeymooning with Julian Thorne. I had meticulously planned a travel itinerary, marking every road, every snow-capped mountain, every spot where we could see the sunrise. But when I carefully presented the plan to him, he just frowned and said, "It's too far. I'm busy with work and don't have time." After that, I never dared to bring up traveling together again. That densely detailed travel itinerary was quietly tucked away in the deep part of my drawer. Now, I finally came. Exactly as I had planned in my travel itinerary, just without him. But I felt lighter than ever before. I rode across the Wyndham Plains, galloping through golden waves of grass at sunset. I sat by Lake Serenity, watching the morning mist rise and ripple across the water. In the tent at night, I gathered around a campfire with travelers from all over, listening to them talk about their love, work, and pursuits. Here, no one knew I was Mrs. Thorne, no, the former Mrs. Thorne. No one cared what I had been through, why I came, or when I would leave. We all treated each other as accidental passers-by on a journey. I began to feel that the world was so vast, vast enough for me to grow anew. That evening, I saw my blurred reflection in the car window. I was no longer the cautious Mrs. Thorne, always walking on eggshells and trying to please others. Nor was I the Miss Davies, taught from a young age to be gentle and considerate, and to enter into an arranged marriage for the family. I was just Eleanor Davies, just myself. A free, complete woman. No one to hold me back, and no one who could hurt me again. In that moment, I finally understood that my past marriage wasn't my fault. It wasn't wrong for me to love, but my love once made me lose myself. And now, I no longer want to wait for anyone's response. Because the world is already responding to me. I stayed in Pine Ridge for a long time, longer than I expected. Initially, I just happened to help a lost child, and then I started working with local volunteers to deliver supplies to remote mountain villages. Later, I simply stayed. I saw children who had to walk 3 or 4 hours through mountain paths to go to school every day, and some villages had no proper roads, getting cut off by mud when it rained, making it impossible for ambulances to enter. I suddenly felt I should do something. Not for anyone, not out of a sudden wave of compassion. It was just that I suddenly felt I should transform those empty and painful experiences into a little bit of strength, to be applied where it was truly needed. I began to establish the Starlight Foundation, specifically for education, infrastructure development, and women's health protection in remote areas. The name was chosen spontaneously. Starlight combined the Eleanor from my name and Star, which I had once wanted to name my child. It was a small memorial and compensation for the child we never met. The day the foundation launched, I stood on stage at the fundraising press conference, looking at the faces lit up by compassion, and suddenly felt a lump in my throat. The woman who once sacrificed so much for a man had come so very far. Until one afternoon, my secretary came into my office with a private, anonymous letter. "This donation is substantial. It came through a corporate account, and they left this note." I took it and saw the donor was Summit Holdings. I froze for a few seconds before realizing the significance of those 4 words. That was the Thorne family's firm, and also the reason Julian Thorne initially refused to come to Wyndham Valley. He said he was too busy, couldn't leave. He came after all, just in a different way. I accepted the money. I didn't call, didn't message, and didn't say a word of thanks. I just looked up at the setting sun in the sky and softly said, "Consider it a blessing for the child we never met." I knew he was also regretting and making amends. But this time I wouldn't respond to the past with forgiveness. I would continue my journey in a way that truly belonged to me.